Hello, I'm Emily Thomas with the BBC News. A military airstrike on a village in Myanmar is thought to have killed at least 50 people, including children. The Burmese armed forces appear to have targeted opponents of the coup it launched 2 years ago. Here's Jonathan Head.
Paziji had been unusually crowded, with people from nearby communities attending a ceremony to mark the opening of a new local administration office, loyal to the opposition, not to the military government. That is almost certainly why it was attacked. Frustrated by the failure of its troops to regain control of much of the country, the junta has increasingly been relying on its Russian and Chinese aircraft to bomb opposition villages, causing much higher civilian casualties. Those running their own schools and clinics, in defiance of the military or with strong local militias, have been particular targets.
The United Nations says it's being forced into making an appalling choice on whether to continue its operations in Afghanistan after the Taliban banned women from working for the organisation there. The UN's mission in Afghanistan said it was conflicted between staying and delivering support to the Afghan people and standing by its principles on women's rights. Yogita Lamae reports.
The UN has told all of its Afghan employees, both men and women, not to report to work until further notice, barring a few people who are required for critical jobs. It said the Taliban government would be responsible for any negative consequences this has for the people of Afghanistan. The head of the UN's mission in the country is conducting a review and putting contingency plans in place, even as the organisation continues to engage with the Taliban on the matter. The Taliban are yet to respond to questions about the latest order.
The United States and the Philippines have launched their largest ever joint military exercise. This coincides with growing Chinese assertiveness across the region and comes just a day after China said it had finished its own military exercise around Taiwan. Shaima Khalil reports.
The U.S. and the Philippines announced that their annual Balikatan exercise would be their largest ever, after Washington secured a new defense deal with Manila earlier this year. The drills include a live-fire exercise from a sunken ship in the South China Sea and involve more than 17,000 troops. The waterways around the Philippines and across Southeast Asia are among the world's busiest trade routes and have been the subject of disputed territorial claims by Beijing.
Switzerland's President Alain Berset says the government had no choice but to order the takeover of the troubled bank Credit Suisse by its rival UBS so as to prevent a financial crisis. Defending the decision to an emergency session of the federal parliament, Mr. Berset said the authorities had been aware since last year about a collapse of confidence in Credit Suisse. World News from the BBC. The Russian Duma is debating legislation that would make online call-up notices mandatory to act on in a bid to facilitate further mobilization for the Ukraine war. After a chaotic rollout last year, the Kremlin promised to fix mistakes with its mobilization campaign, when young men would often be picked up in the street or in shopping malls. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, who's begun a visit to Somalia, has called for massive international support. The UN has launched a multi-billion-dollar appeal for the country where millions are facing famine. So far, it's received little funding. Mr. Guterres said people were suffering and the need was urgent.
Although Somalia makes virtually no contribution to climate change, the Somalis are among the greatest victims. Nearly 5 million people are experiencing high levels of acute food insecurity. And of course, rising prices make matters worse. So I call on donors and I call on the international community to step up their support.
3 cities in the troubled Amhara region of north-central Ethiopia have introduced nighttime curfews in the face of massive anti-government protests. Dessie, Debre Birhan and Gondar have also introduced restrictions on civilians demonstrating, carrying weapons or moving around without ID. Members of a regional paramilitary group and their supporters are protesting against a federal order for the forces to be dissolved. A prominent Czech dissident of the communist era, Dana Němcová, has died at the age of 89. Ms. Němcová was a signatory and speaker of the Charter 77 Declaration, which was the foundation of the Czech human rights and democracy movement. She was also co-founder of a group which documented cases of persecution and sent reports of them abroad. World News from the BBC.